Welcome everybody to Before the Commit, episode 29. This week we'll be covering in Tool of the Week Portkey and Agent Gateway from Solo. Two more AI gateways. In News or Noise, we've got lots of interesting topics. We got stuff about music copyrights, stuff about the way that in which AI might be displacing more of the workforce, and really exciting news out of SpaceX looking to acquire Cursor. Very interesting deal structure. With me, as usual, I have my friend Dustin Hillgartner. Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, so before we get started, this SpaceX thing is really interesting. For those that are not familiar, SpaceX acquired xAI, two Elon Musk companies. xAI has developed, I would say slower than the rest of the kind of model providers, but I still think they're really strong at research. The model Grok, which, they had a coding model, but not their own coding IDE. And it looks like they're trying to catch up by acquisition. So they have both main competitors with, Anthropic's Claude Code and Codex's, OpenAI's Codex.
Yeah. What's interesting is, so SpaceX merged, I guess is what they're calling it, with xAI. And xAI, as you mentioned, is the producer of Grok. So those who are wondering out there, why is xAI not acquiring Cursor? It's because now xAI is folded into SpaceX as the AI arm of SpaceX. So it is essentially xAI, I imagine, behind the scenes buying Cursor. For folks out there who thought that software is dead, I mean, this is an acknowledgement right here that software is very much alive, because this is a $60 billion purchase of a piece of software that, a year or two ago didn't even exist. And was developed using AI too. So it's an AI, for folks out there who believe you can't build software that's solid with AI, I mean, here's a big acquisition of a piece of software. What's surprising to me is that there's enough IP or stuff there that they think is worth that much money. I think it's somewhat of an
acquihire. Yeah. That's like when you're thirsty and you want to drink. Could you acquihire me a bottle of water?
Just give me water, I'll come.
It's a really cheap acquisition.
I think a lot of this probably has to do with the engineering. The folks that are there. There's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of folks with a lot of experience in this area. I think this kind of links in with the next story about Snap and reducing headcount, and I'll talk about that there. But
$60 billion for an acquihire, that seems a bit outrageous.
Clearly, it's also for the software, I would imagine, right? It would probably be less if it was just an acquihire. But it shows that this talent is important. You can't just find it anywhere. And I think this leads into the other story. I'll get into that later. But so they're purchasing, or here's the way the deal is structured, right? So, and there's some speculation here. So SpaceX is lining up an IPO at about $2 trillion, I think is the estimate valuation. And I think the reason why they're not just outright purchasing Cursor, because Cursor has essentially agreed to the deal. They're like, buy us for $60 billion. Sure, we'll take it. But they can't. I think it's more complicated if they buy them right now, right before the IPO, because then there's probably a whole bunch of other regulatory things that can delay the IPO, et cetera, as you get approval for the acquisition, et cetera. So I think that what they've done is they've structured it by saying, our intent is to buy you for $60 billion. you've agreed to it, and if we pull out, we'll pay you 10 billion. So essentially, it's a very strong indicator that right after this IPO, they're going through with the deal. Cursor's good with it. So yeah, I mean, it seems like that means that unless Cursor takes a nosedive.
So if you're a Cursor employee, a Cursor user right now, you have the ability, because like Cursor's always been in the like kind of like spaces like Open Router. I mean, not to the effect of like an IDE where you were paying Cursor like the $20 a month and then you could use like their models, but I believe you could also modify Cursor to like use your own AP, bring your own keys. So I'm curious if you're a Cursor user right now, like what is this going to look like after post acquisition? Or will Cursor already start making changes knowing that this is pretty much a done deal? Like they're going to get it no matter what. Like, not to say that like SpaceX couldn't pay the $10 billion to walk away. I mean, it's probably pocket change for them.
I mean, it's pocket change for Elon Musk at least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because Cursor also has their own model that they just released recently. So it's interesting, like in this new Cursor that's acquired, assuming that takes place, does Grok become the main model? Do they kind of like merge both of the models? Maybe distill Cursor's model into Grok, or there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with models in terms of like acquiring skills from each other. Or are they going to be two separate models, right? Going forward, are you just going to get, is it going to transform into something more like Claude Code or more like Codex, where you get a subscription or something to Grok models now, or to XAI's models? It's going to be interesting to see how it's set up. But it definitely is looking like Anthropic was very smart from the beginning and realizing that the most important companion to your hyperscaler is a coding harness. Yeah. And they jumped into that with Claude Code first. OpenAI then came in with Codex, and Google, I think, has like anti-gravity. And it looks like XAI/SpaceX is going to be jumping into the ring and acquiring their coding harness.
Yeah, I just looked at Cursor's website. I mean, like back when we were using it, it was really a derivative of VS Code, but it looks like they're very different now in that they have their own CLI, and their desktop app looks like a CMUX fork, very similar to Crow. I think it might be interesting for us to circle back to Cursor at some point and take a look at it, because it's been a while. It's been almost a year.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. I've gone back to it a few times, once or twice over the course of the last year, just to check out this or that. But it's been a while since I've probably used it recently. So we should definitely check it out again and see where they've come in the past months.
Yeah, so what about like, I mean, people who might be like Musk-averse? How are they, how does this shake out? Like, does Cursor not care because they're getting $60 billion?
It's a good question. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you have the same thing that happened with like, I mean, there's no mistake that there's political effects on the AI world. Like, a few weeks ago, the president of the United States made a declaration about Anthropic, and then, certain people like signed up for Anthropic to support it. So yeah, for sure, there's always going to be an effect there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there's like, folks who are upset with this from, the political or pop culture perspective and, abandon Cursor because of that. But, I think the coding agents to some extent are very sticky. because you start to get, it's not like deterministic software where once you learn how to use it, it pretty much always works the same exact way. It's much more like working with a person. It's got a personality, it's got its limitations and its strengths, and you start to rely on it working and understand where it won't work. There's a learning curve to these products, and sometimes when you're trying to choose to use a different one, you have to say, okay, well, I've got to go through the learning curve now with this product. It was something that was kind of unexpected when you first start getting into these products, but you get more of a sense for it, that there is a stickiness to AI products. And it's different than how deterministic products went. Deterministic products were more like, I put so much of my data in here that I don't know how to get it out. So I'm going to stick with this. And I'm sure AI has that to some extent too. But like AI has like, it's kind of like working with a teammate on a sports team. You start to gel as a team, and replacing components of that team might change your momentum. So you tend to stick with what you know for longer.
Yeah. And listen, if you're a CEO or a CTO and you have a team of, 100 engineers and they're using Cursor, you have to weigh out, like, is your political beliefs or your philosophies about a personality or a company's practices enough to force those people that, especially engineers, which develop creature comforts around tooling, and it's hard to like get them to eject those things without losing productivity. Figuring out new tooling is not something like, that you could just jump around and hop around to, especially if you have custom skills, commands, etc., that are pipelines that are largely baked around an ecosystem, which is smart for the model providers and the IDE builders.
I think that if there's anyone that's going to abandon for a political reason, it's not going to be the major users of it, the ones that have revenue stacked behind it, right? Like they're going to make more pragmatic choices, where it might be like the vibe coding individual personal accounts that might abandon, the $20
like solopreneurs and whatever. Yeah. So let's jump into tool of the week. So I looked at two more AI gateways, and I chose the first one I looked at. I think the thing that I'm realizing is like AI gateway is a very broad term. And like what we realized last week, we looked at in episode 28 was the Cloudflare AI gateway. And it's designed for a very specific use case right now. And that's more about like building like these like cloud hosted agents, or like agents that like can kind of like have guardrails built around them and auditing built around them. Think about like McDonald's, like AI bot. You order online, or you are trying to figure out what's on the menu, and you want to make sure that somebody can't, which by the way, I don't know if you see this article floating around LinkedIn where people are talking to the McDonald's bot about coding questions.
Yeah.
So it might be a good example of why you would want to have guardrails, because somebody is essentially abusing, or it could be a feature like you're spending more time on McDonald's website and like, might make you hungry for a hamburger. So it might be the best marketing scheme ever, or a abusive token usage. And so actually we have a question from YouTube right now, and he said, how could you jailbreak AI? And it tried to lock me out. I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about guardrails right now. He says he tried Grok and Facebook AI. So I mean, a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is like the reason why you don't want people to break out of AI, why you don't want someone to break out. It's by design. Some are better than others. having guardrails is a feature to prevent, say for example, like breaking through whatever the terms of service might be.
The sneaky truth is that you can't stop it from being jailbroken. So you've got to
Right.
prepare for it being jailbroken. And if anyone wants to test this out there, there's websites out there that will there's rankings. They have like jailbreaking prompt websites that'll rank, and they tell you which ones are working right now and which ones don't work anymore. It's like a whack-a-mole game where the providers are trying to figure out what prompts are working, and then they reinforcement train against it, or they put in deterministic guardrails around it. But the sneaky secret is, at this point in time, at least, I mean, obviously the technology might evolve over time, or techniques or architectures, but at this point, with what you have out there, no model provider can stop it from being jailbroken. What they will do is they will monitor for it, and if they find out that you're attempting to do it, or you've successfully done it, they might consider that a violation of the terms of service of some sort.
Yeah,
for folks that are looking for models out there that don't have guardrails, there's a whole segment on Hugging Face of like unrestricted models, where
but even some of those models actually do have like guardrails in them. Well, not the ones that say they don't, but like, I think the important thing to note is that like guardrails were put there by the model provider because they have some reason for the guardrails being there for whatever reason. And you could always build your own model that doesn't have guardrails on it. And Hugging Face is one of those places. But I also want to say that just because it's an offline model like Llama doesn't mean that there aren't guardrails, because I've actually hit guardrails before, or like things that prevented me from kind of escaping. So that's part of it. So back to the topic. So what I realized was that there's this like industry, or this like field of AI gateways is very diverse, and like it was more obvious as I started to look at the first tool, which is there's a company called Solo AI, and they have an open source solution, and essentially it is a Kubernetes based like kind of solution. I don't know if you want to explain to the audience what Kubernetes is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to explain Kubernetes is it's a orchestration for your infrastructure. So it's a container first orchestration for infrastructure. So, folks are perhaps familiar with like EC2 and things like that. Well, you could, for instance, essentially cluster a bunch of EC2 boxes or a bunch of machines together of any type. You can cluster Raspberry Pis, etc., into Kubernetes. It kind of abstracts you away from the idea that there are multiple machines, and you can plan your architecture out from the perspective of containers and how they interact with each other. And it has a whole bunch of, I guess, first party and third party services that allow you to do networking and security and all kinds of things around your Kubernetes cluster. Off the top.
So imagine you have this like, distribution of Kubernetes running agents, right? And you want to then have an AI gateway that can sort of govern their behavior. It's a very different use case. I never actually thought about like why, maybe you're setting up like a large network for maybe you're building an environment for people to deploy their own agents, and you want to ensure that you have guardrails in place and policies and routing rules that would, prevent these like container-based agents from like doing something they weren't supposed to. So I there's like a standalone binary that I downloaded. I wasn't going to go and set up like a whole Kubernetes environment for this for the podcast. And you can configure some of these things in here. Like you can set up a listener, a route. A route is like,
so just real quick, just so I can make sure I understand.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get it from the beginning. So you're saying instead of this being an AI gateway like you would have in the cloud and you'd point all your AI traffic at, or you'd have maybe on-prem running in your VPC and you're pointing all your internal traffic at it or something like that. This is it almost like an active, like it's setting up a Kubernetes cluster and then you're setting up all the routes, and perhaps it can like guardrail like inter-process, microservice communication or whatnot?
It assumes you have the Kubernetes environment set up. It's essentially a Helm chart with a bunch of configuration, and then it has the ability to inject policies. The policies are like the guardrails, the routes, like all of this is configurable through like the Helm chart. Like you do get this navigational gateway, but you can just imagine it's like a giant Helm chart that injects itself like, and it has the ability to interact with Istio. So Istio is like the mesh gateway that introduces like a sidecar into each application. So then the Istio like natively doesn't deal with like AI guardrails. So you can imagine if you have a pod that's a container that is an AI agent and it needs to talk to something else, you want to make sure that the service-to-service communication inside of your Kubernetes cluster has some kind of AI gateway. That's why it's called agent gateway and not AI gateway.
Ah, yeah. I didn't catch that first, but now I get it.
Yeah. So when I popped this up, I was expecting to do what I do on most of my demos is I try to wire Claude Code up through pass-through mode and just start flowing some traffic and then starting to wrap my head around what makes this gateway different. And when I stood up when you start up the binary with the config file, the YAML file, you get this interface and you can set up a few things, but it became clear right away this is a very different type of solution. And again, I didn't go through the effort because setting up the guardrails is just configuring a bunch of YAML. And I really didn't want to sit there and do that. So yeah, I mean, this is Agent Gateway. It's a very different type of AI gateway. The company itself sells managed services. So they basically, it's all open source, but you can reach out to them and they help you set this whole thing up. And like I said, it integrates into Istio. It integrates into, they have like custom resource definitions, like CRDs, which are basically your guardrails and your policies and things like that.
Pretty cool.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but it makes a lot of sense to have essentially like a governance, an AI governance within your Kubernetes cluster. A gateway that's doing inter-agent communication.
Yeah. So guys, trying to figure out what Kubernetes is. Yeah, I hope we explained it.
Yeah.
I'll put the spelling in the chat. And yeah, it's spelled like that. It's also known as K8s, but essentially many of the larger providers out there that are deploying infrastructure behind the scenes, the infrastructure layer is using Kubernetes technology that came out of Google.
Yeah, and there's also some managed control planes out there for Kubernetes. So, you have, I think it's like GKE or something like that with, what is it,
Yep.
Oracle, or OKE with Oracle, and GKE with Google, and EKS with Amazon.
Yeah.
So if you've heard any of those are also Kubernetes managed providers.
So the other one is Portkey. So Portkey is interesting. It is more akin to, I would say, light LLM than any of the other ones we've looked at so far. Let me zoom in a little bit. So, I mean, it has everything that you would expect from a AI gateway that is essentially a proxy server. This is a SaaS-based solution. I did not see a way to run this outside of SaaS, but you have users and you have, your dashboard, your analytics, the number of requests, which models you're using. You have your log level data, so you can, come in here, you can see how much it costs, the API key that was used, the provider. The interesting thing about how they call API keys is very similar to how Cloudflare did it, is that you create like a slug or an alias and you pass that as a header, and that tells it behind the scenes like which key to use. And you could interchangeably swap out the keys without actually having to go and make code changes. So you never leak the key because the key is essentially an alias, which is the
Makes
key,
sense.
by the way.
Yeah, which becomes
So,
the key at that point.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, you can see,
It's one degree of separation so that you can rotate keys without having to go and like update all your secret stores and stuff like that. It becomes
yeah,
your secret store for you, kind of.
yeah, and I think it's a theme around Portkey. It's a very interesting way, and I'll get to this in a second, is that Portkey allows more ability to control what your application is doing through a variety of headers. And I'll get into this in a second. But yeah, you have everything, it says it actually shows all the tool calls. So all my MCP server tool calls are getting passed between responses as these like slugs, which is pretty cool. Yeah, you have your logs. You can share the logs. Nice little convenience button. They have a traces thing. I guess this is similar to sessions, maybe. And then they have these other things, like they have, an MCP registry, and then they have A2A built into it as well, which we covered in an earlier podcast. So they have first class A2A and MCP. And so you create an agent integration, and it uses the A2A protocol to talk to agents. So if you have an agent that you built that complies with the A2A protocol, which is becoming more popular, I'm seeing it more often, you can basically pull the agent into your gateway and then call it the same way, MCP. Their MCP is very basic. Their advanced configuration is just a box. So it's very high level. I don't see like deep role-based access control or anything. So they have guardrails. They have a very extensive guardrails library, probably the most impressive I've seen. They have JOT, model allow list, regex, sentence count, character count. A lot. Is polite, gender bias, racial bias, so on and so forth. Then they have partners. So they have partner ones that are built in here. So very extensive, and then pro. So yeah, a lot of this is free, and then you have to pay for upgrades to some of these other guardrails.
Very cool. Yeah, the guardrails are turning out to be kind of like, like a plugin marketplace type of thing where, some companies, their entire business model is producing high quality guardrails, essentially.
Yeah. And then they have actions. So the actions are, run the guardrail async, deny if the request fails, run them sequentially, and then you could do failure, success. So a lot of interesting, probably the more robust of the guardrails setup I've seen. So the interesting thing about this that is very different than any of the other ones that I've seen is an emphasis on being able to control the logic of your business application without having to change code. I've not seen that before at the gateway level. And I would say it's very distinct in this offering. It's probably unlike any offering that I've seen so far. And that's this prompts tab.
Mhm.
So you have this ability to call this ID via header. And like I said, Portkey has this like very extensive like header configuration where every HTTP request you can configure how that request gets responded to, whether it be a set of guardrails or in this case, a prompt. So like normally or like occasionally, your prompts are part of your application logic. The Portkey methodology or philosophy seems to be don't do that. Don't put your prompts inside of your application. Or maybe you want to, but perhaps you should decouple the prompts from the application code and instead specify a prompt pointer. And then you include all of the logic around your prompting inside of the gateway. So you can do everything that you could think you can do. You can create a system prompt. You can create a user prompt. You can test it out. You can add variables. So you may want to pass variables to your request that then get filled in. So you could say, make a parameter, that parameter is like some magic variable, something like that. And then you can pass that data along inside of the request that then gets populated. And then you could add tool calling, so very, very interesting. And then you can also do partials. So you could build a partial prompt that then becomes like, if you're familiar with like handlebars, in handlebars, like a templating language, but you can also
do partials,
that you can inject into the rest of your larger prompts. So you have this like whole like robust, like kind of almost like a programming language inside of the gateway.
If I'm not mistaken, right? No, this is really cool, and I like how they have it front and center. And I think in the prompt partials is something I haven't seen before. But the prompts thing, funny enough, I think Light LLM has that feature, but they buried it. It's like really buried, or it's behind Enterprise. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at Light LLM at all, but I remember that they had a prompt feature, but it was either buried or behind Enterprise, one or the other. And I remember it being something like this, but I just didn't have a use for it at the time. But these guys are going with it, more front and center, Portkey.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty cool feature, actually.
Yeah, it is. I think it has a lot of utility. I mean, one use case is like, imagine like you want to be able to rapidly modify your prompts, or you want to do A/B testing. They have version history. So you could actually publish like a new version, and then you could selectively, change out like and see if a prompt has like a different behavior without having to like do all this like code change.
Yeah, that is interesting. It becomes kind of like, I do think that there's a component where you need to kind of like A/B test prompt changes over time, because one thing that I find when I'm correcting issues that end up being prompt changes is how many test runs do I have to do before I feel like how do you know that something that worked most of the time, but every once in a while screwed up, got better or worse unless you run it over a period of time? And how do you know, like, because these are probabilistic, it's not like you can just run a test, an integration test of your finished prompt at the end and know anything more than one of the rolls of the dice of what you got. What you really need to know over time is like the percentage of good rolls versus bad rolls. And that's what's going to determine whether your prompt got better or worse. So like the idea of A/B testing or the idea of being able to swap these out without changing code is well, also keeping track of versions, of course, is is something that's pretty useful.
Yeah, the emphasis on like being able to test this out, so you can hit their prompt playground, you can test with different models, see how those models perform against, see how the prompts perform against different models. And somebody that is not necessarily a software engineer that is doing coding can come in here and basically have like somewhat of a dashboard or like a mission control center where they can kind of augment the behavior of agents or the MCP gateway or whatever application logic. So it's not just an MCP, sorry, it's not just an AI gateway. It is also like, I guess like a prompt library is what they call it. That you can then use to control your business logic, which is very different than an AI gateway.
Yeah, in the traditional sense, for sure.
Yeah. So that just goes to further say that just because somebody says they're an AI gateway does not mean that whatever you think an AI gateway is what it is. Like the term is overloaded a little bit, even in the infancy of what it is. And you really need to look under the hood to see like what differentiates this AI gateway from the rest of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a lot of non-overlap amongst the AI gateways. They all tend to be taking somewhat of a niche from each other. Which makes
they all have guardrails in common so far.
Yeah.
And they all have API keys in common. But yeah, they all
the
kind
idea
of
of like at this point, the only thing that all the AI gateways have in common is that they guard your users from knowing the provider keys, and they have guardrails in place, and probably they marshal the formats to OpenAI or something like that, and then have pass-throughs.
Yes, exactly.
So you want to talk about Snap?
Yeah.
So on April 15th, Snap cut 16% of its workforce, roughly 1,000 people, and closed another 300.
So Snap is Snapchat? Is that Snap?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the CEO, Evan Spiegel, explicitly cited AI as being the.
How does Snapchat make money? Like I'm not sure I understand the business model.
Well, I mean, I think it's just like it's kind of like the same model as Facebook and Instagram, I would think, where it's weaving a social graph. It's trying to but it's much more like a signal, not from necessarily the security perspective, but it's a social / messaging app, right? So
so they have a paid tier.
Difference, the main reason why it exists is it's a different demographic. It's definitely trends younger. I think the first feature they had that was really a differentiator that in their infancy kind of took them off as a different messaging app was the fact that they had disappearing messages. And you've seen a lot of the other messaging apps kind of adopt that same concept. But I think also they've been very big in the AI, like filters and stuff like that. A lot of like, and I think it was centered around, or maybe I'm confusing the AI filter thing with Instagram a little bit.
No, you're right.
They did have the camera aspect.
Yeah, so
you have like the exploding images, right? You could take a picture of yourself, selfie doing something, you send it to somebody, it disappears. I think they had stories in it at some point. It's been a while since I've had Snapchat.
Yeah, it's really sponsored lens ads, AR filters, ads. Advertisers are drawn to Snapchats, and then they sell Snapchat Plus, a paid tier for around $4 a month. They also have hardware sales spectacles, their camera lenses through are more of an R&D investment more than a profit center. Okay, cool. I figured it out.
So the CEO explicitly cited AI as being the reason, saying now that AI writes more than 65% of Snap's new code. And the stock has gone up 11% since he mentioned that. So the reason why I thought this story was interesting is there's been a lot of these stories and there's speculation back and forth about whether they're, post-COVID layoffs when everyone was over hiring. And they disguise it as AI because it's a more positive trend in terms of like the stock price goes up when you say you're optimizing with AI. Whereas if you say you overhired and you got to cut back, your stock prices, or at least in public opinion, you're going to get beat up. A lot of times layoffs actually make the stock price go up as well. But not for a growth company, though. Usually layoffs for a growth company is a bad thing stock-wise. So anyway, I didn't really want to get into that debate because it's all speculative one way or the other. How can you really know what's going on internally unless you were in the boardroom? But I have some thoughts about this after now talking to numerous companies in the market about AI. There's folks that we talk to that ask us for advice. There's folks that we talk to just to sort of trade, working knowledge in a market that's very fluid. And a pattern that I find, and once again, this is speculative. I have no idea what they're doing behind the scene, but a pattern that I've noticed is that AI really doesn't cut through your company 100%. It's not like other tech where, when jQuery was overpassed by AngularJS and React, there wasn't many engineers who were like, no, I'm going to continue using jQuery because this higher level language is taking away my skills or is not letting you write something as good or whatnot. Whereas with AI, what's interesting in a lot of these big businesses and a lot of small businesses too, is that you're finding that there's some people that adapt to AI very quickly, and there's others that are resistant to it. And they don't want to have anything to do with it. They believe it's a fad, or they believe it doesn't do as good a job as they do. And I wonder if these AI layoffs, maybe the speculation isn't between two choices. Maybe it's a false choice. Maybe it's not, AI is doing so much coding, I don't need these people. And it's also not, I hired too many people and I got to get rid of them. Maybe it's some of my people are using AI and some of them aren't. And I have decided that it's easier to just find more people that use AI than it is to try to convince the stubborn ones not to do it, or to do it. And the other reason why I think this dovetails into the first story is, if it's so easy to build anything and engineers can be taught how to use AI, why would you pay $60 billion to buy Cursor as, partially an acqui-hire? It's because it's not like every engineer magically turns into an AI developer when you hand them the tools. Some of them refuse to use the tools. They refuse to learn how to use them. And it's not.
Let me ask you a question on that. Do you think that Snap lays off 1,000 people and then hires 500 AI engineers?
If I had to bet, I'd bet that if you went to Snap's website, they probably are still hiring in engineering. It's just that it's a different description,
Yeah. So the layoff isn't really about, we are ready to reduce our workforce by 1,000. We just need a different type of person that's working here. And maybe we don't need as many of them. We need a certain amount.
I think it's a combination of both. I think Anthropic went through this where they paused hiring for a little bit. And they said, it's not that they're not going to hire anymore. It's that they're figuring out what they need because they're doing much more with less as these tools evolve. And I think a lot of companies are going through that where they're perhaps slowing down in terms of hiring because they don't know what they need yet. Mm-hmm. Everything's still too fluid. They don't know what productivity they're going to get. A lot of their engineers are ramping up on AI tools, and they don't know yet how many people they need or how many people they don't need because it's still very fluid. Everyone's, skilling up, if you will, with AI tools, and the processes are evolving behind the scenes. And, it's a very fluid, it's in progress. And maybe the companies that have kind of gotten to the point where they figure out what their new velocity is, and they find, okay, well, we have enough people for the next 6 months. They say, well, now I can cut back on these folks that are resistant or the lower performers in the AI stack.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a signal. Like, we talked about signal versus noise. This is definitely a signal. And it's a leading signal because most of the stories you see are around tech-heavy companies or companies are talking about software engineers. This signal indicates that other parts of organizations will need to do the same thing for other types of roles. Because, yeah, sure, there's a special type of person that can write AI code, but there's also a special type of person in your HR department or your sales team. Or your whatever you have you
paralegal or whatnot,
whatever have you. And every organization is, it's a little bit of a trailing or a lagging indicator that will take effect on these other organizations. But like, you have to imagine that if you want to be ahead of your competitors, that you need to do the same thing across your org. You need to upskill your organization either by augmenting your existing workforce through teaching them, like skilling them up, or replacing them with a different type of worker, which I would tell anybody who's young right now, no matter what you're studying in school, make sure it has a layer of AI on top of it, which I'm assuming most schools are doing. I mean,
you'd think so. You'd hope so.
Yeah, you would hope. Yeah.
I mean, the problem is that the whole idea of whether you're embracing AI or resistant to it cuts through every industry, Yeah. So, you probably have some teachers that are embracing it and some that aren't. And then a whole bunch of people that aren't aware of it and don't know enough about it in order to really have an opinion one way or the other. So, that's my kind of speculative thought about what's going on, what I've seen. When I've talked to folks in companies, whether they're running teams or running the whole business, I've heard numerous times, enough to be a trend, that it's not easy getting everyone to use AI, right? You'd think that this magical thing came down that takes over a whole monotonous task that you used to have to spend most of your time doing. And you'd think that you'd be like, oh, wow, I don't have to take the garbage out anymore, or I don't have to, do laundry. But instead, there's a lot of folks that are, very resistant to it.
Yeah. Well, more, we'll see more. I mean, I suspect that, other organizations will do the same thing and will take the lead on this. So.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a trend. I think there's going to be other companies that do it. And what I'm very interested in as a signal to whether or not it's something more than that is you'd think that if AI is the reason for the layoff in the way that people think it is, like it's doing all the work and we don't need anyone anymore, then as these models get better and better and better, they would continue to lay off more and more people. So I wonder if they're going to be hiring engineers in the coming days. Whether they already have it on their website. I probably should have checked that out before this podcast, but I'm going to go check it out afterwards and see, because I'm interested to see if they're actually still hiring engineering, and then in the coming months, if they continue to hire engineering, because that would be an indicator that maybe it's
they're still hiring.
It's rotation
There's-
more than anything.
They're definitely still hiring. There's lots of open roles in engineering, in marketing, legal. So yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get to the last one. This Anthropic record music copyright.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story to me. I mean, Anthropic is arguing before a federal judge this week that training Claude on copyrighted song lyrics from UMG, Universal Music Group, and other publishers is fair use. They're saying it's transformative fair use. Meanwhile, they're already on the hook for the largest copyright settlement in U.S. history. I think it's Bart's versus Anthropic over training on books. So they've already had to settle on being sued for training on books, and now they're being sued for training on music and song lyrics. And I mean, the reason why this is interesting is because the ruling sets legal, it's going to set legal precedents. It's probably going to apply to all the other AI companies who have also trained on data like this. And also, to me, it's interesting based on the argument. And also like the long tail of where we're going. Maybe it's a little bit less wishy-washy now because we're looking at AI more and more like tools. I think it's also the market's not very mature, so most people don't have a really good understanding of how this stuff works or anything like that. It seems like common sense to most people that if you were to ask AI to write Moby Dick and it wrote Moby Dick almost word for word, that somehow they had stolen that book. They had it somewhere, they stole a copy of it. But the reality is if you look inside of the model, there's no material in there at all. It's just probabilistic weights. It's just a bunch of numbers with commas, and the numbers are not some sort of secret cipher that ends up with Moby Dick in there somewhere. So it's the same. I mean, this is offensive to some people, but it's the same way you remember Moby Dick. It's just that your memory is just not as perfect as the computer is. So the computer can remember it perfectly, and you can only remember it vaguely. There's just a bigger hard drive and more efficient way of storing it.
Yeah, I mean, but also like these models have the ability to look up stuff on the internet too, and like maybe the judges or the lawyers don't fully get that. Like there's a blurring of the lines. So if you could make a bunch of tool calls to like snippets of something that somebody else wrote, and then you layer that in with the fact that the model was trained on some of these creative works, it increases the likelihood. So yeah, I could see both sides of the argument. One of the things, yeah, go ahead.
I just find it comical that like if you go to music school, you're going to be trained on these, your neural network is going to be trained on these arts. And then if you go out and we say it all the time, like if you come out with this new musical thing, you'll say, I was inspired by Prince, that meant you listened to Prince, you read his lyrics, you loved Prince.
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to money. It comes down to the fact that somebody is monetizing what I built. Like
an industry has a lot of money, and you can make a case, you can get some of that money. No, I agree.
One of the things that's interesting about all of this is the market for class action lawsuits is probably bigger than the market. Like it almost makes sense to create a creative works and then let someone steal it and then sue you for it because you'll probably make more money.
Yeah.
Because these model companies are paying out. They're like, okay, we'll pay the speeding ticket.
Yeah.
And like, I think one of the articles that you pointed to was that, like, the US can't actually afford the copyright laws because like one creative work could be 150K. When you train it on millions of books, articles, or images, you multiply that in the millions, it could be trillions of dollars theoretical damages that
Yeah.
nobody could afford.
Yeah. It's
Which means that the deterrent for the model companies is just like, okay, we'll pay the speeding ticket. What we're paying, they paid $1.5 billion class action lawsuit. I mean, think about that. They paid for data that cost them $1.5 billion. Like, that's how they probably start to look at it, right?
mhm. I just worry that, like, well, I don't worry honestly about this at all, but I guess my concern is, how do you set a principle for this, right? Because if the intelligence of these models just gets better and better and better to the point where it's almost it's indistinguishable from a human being in terms of its ability to function in society,
Mm-hmm.
like, how does it work, right? Like, if your robot goes out to a movie and watches the movie, are you going to get sued because it then is inspired by something that you ask and it produces something later? It's very interesting. I don't know how it's all going to work, right? Because I think at some point the intelligence of these things, and it just starts to become like, they're like almost like living beings out there, interacting in society the way human beings are. And I think we're on like a collision course with like having to truly define what consciousness is and what you know what rights are, to some extent, when it comes to these intelligences from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point they're going to outnumber, and people are like, well, this is crazy. It's easy. Just tell the robots they can. I mean, at some point the robots, and sometimes at some point the AI agents, are going to outnumber humans by like a millionfold. There's going to, like, how do you stop these things from observing reality and then reacting to them? I mean, that's what they're supposed to do, right? So,
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, it also talked about lyrics and stuff like that, not just the music itself, which is, similar to books, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
By the way, I did try to ask it to recreate a creative work for me, and it wouldn't let me do it. So there's some guardrails on Claude to do it, to not allow it, saying it's copyrighted. So
it won't even put an Apache 2.0 license in my repo when I wanted to open source it. I had to do that manually. It was, the license for Apache was copyrighted.
Is it? Yeah. Wow.
Or at least it thought it was. It was just erring on the side of not doing it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. We'll be away for a few weeks. We'll be back on May 12th with special guest Steve Thomas, CEO of Hack Notice, for an interesting conversation into the world of breach notifications. Thanks for joining.